Hey everyone, and welcome back to Tattoos Book Club. Man, I'm dark. So we're reading Daniel Boulud's book, Letters to a Young Chef. We've read a couple of chapters already, those chapters already. You check them out with our other videos that I've posted, and yeah. So we're on our third chapter, and it's called The Trinity of Heat. And here we go. Oh, and there's like tidbits of information you want that I think you should know or whatever. I'll stop and I'll say whatever. Okay. Becoming a chef, like making a good stock, needs unhurried, unpressured time. All cuisine starts with heating ingredients. Roasting, braising, and sauteing are, to my mind, the key methods and the foundation of French cuisine. Other forms of heat have their uses: poaching, grilling, broiling, sous vide. Sous vide is like when they cook stuff like in the water, like packaged, right? But in the classical kitchen, the master of heat is first and foremost one who can roast, braise, and saute. Cuisine literally means to add heat to food. The idea is simple, the variations are infinite. Your range of temperatures is vast, from roughly 120 degrees for a slow confit of salmon, which is something cooked in its own fat, to 900 degrees for tandoori lamb. When you understand heat, you see food down to its very molecules. You will sense that ingredients have been transformed by heat into something sensual and satisfying. This mystical gift of sight and sensation is nothing more than the experience gained from making thousands of dishes, so that a simple touch or smell will tell you exactly when something is done, which is true. Tidbit. Cooking for a long time, you could like touch a piece of steak, a duck, fish, and you could tell when it's done or when it's close. Following a recipe by rote will never allow you to achieve this result. Every living thing is unique and will respond to heat differently. No two lambs, no two ducks, no two foie gras are exactly the same. Each must be watched, prodded, and smelled until you sense, because you have cooked the recipe 1,000 times before, and that's the way it's done. The recipe is at base nothing more than chemistry. The chef's job to employ heat to transform ingredients is the closest thing to alchemy. I know that this is nothing more than the result of years of work and practice, yet the results, when they are right, feel truly like the work of magic. I once made a quail, for example, stuffed with foie gras and figs, three ingredients that require different cooking times. I could have roasted everything independently and made a nice dish, but I thought it would be more interesting all cooked together. If I stuffed the quail and roasted until the foie gras was done, I would have a bird the texture of denim, stuffed with figs turned to runny mush, and perfectly cooked foie gras. Clearly not my goal. What I needed to do before stuffing was to pre-sear and halfway cook the slice of foie gras and use ripe figs so that warming would just soften them. To execute this in the kitchen, logic required 3 steps in heating. Understanding the interplay between heat and ingredients, however, allowed me to achieve a single combined recipe that produced a roasted whole quail split in half with perfectly pink breast meat, glistening foie gras, and velvety soft figs. A few years later, in preparing one of my quarterly 15-course blowouts for the renowned wine expert Bob Parker and his friends, I decided to up the ante and complicate the whole thing. I wanted to do a Ballantine, a boneless roe and stuffed roast of duck, foie gras, and figs. I used a boneless butterfly duck stuffed with spiced ripe figs, wrapped in a thin slice of speck ham, and whole foie gras marinated in saltiness, salt, pepper, and a spice mix of cinnamon, star anise, powdered clove, and grated orange zest. Once stuffed, the duck was trussed with twine. To finish, I had a range of different heat goals. This time, I pre-roasted the foie gras in its own fat until it was halfway done. And in other words, I didn't need the foie gras to be pre-cooked as in the quail, because by the time the duck was roasted, the moist pinkness will allow partially cooked foie gras time to release fat to infuse figs, speck, and duck meat. While the duck roasted, it was glazed and basted with spiced honey, salt, and reduced citrus juice to give it a glistening crust. So I was striving to achieve different levels of doneness while controlling many ingredients, all with different textures and flavors. Before serving, we presented it as the Scafri might have done, a silver platter that glittered like the full moon on the ocean. Sorry for the train. The glistening glazed Valentine in the center, surrounded by a ring of endive caramelized and orange juice. Like all the time I try to talk. Slicing the roast released a puff of sweet, spicy steam. On the plate, you had a golden brown skin an outer ring of rosy, succulent duck, a firm and fatty foie gras, and a sweet and salty boudin of fruit and ham, a spectacular dish that Bob Parker still talks about. It is the challenge of creating new dishes like this that excites the chef. See what I mean about so much to learn and the need for the time to learn it? So let's get our aprons dirty and feel the heat of the line, the smoke, the steam, the sizzle of the noise of the chef's home. Usually for more hours than his real home, the kitchen. Like I said, this is read in, this is from France, so it's like written the way he would talk to this. The fundamental method of transforming food throughout heat is, to my mind, roasting. If the hearth is the heart of the home, the rotisserie station is the heart of the restaurant. Roasting is not a fast process. When you roast, you cannot walk away from it the way you can leave a stock or a braised dish. You must stay connected to the food when you roast. You need to touch, smell, and baste every so often. You need to add vegetables and garnishes at certain times so that they are finished just when the roast is finished. This keeps you on your toes. At home, a great roast, say a chicken, becomes the centerpiece of the day, both in the cooking and eating. The first consideration is the chicken. You need a good organic chicken, definitely not a plastic wrapped factory farm chicken. Rinse it well, pat dry, let it air dry in the fridge overnight so that the skin is no longer wet. Seasoning both the inside and out is important. Add garlic, shallots, parsley, and thyme in the cavity. Put 2 pats of butter on top of the chicken and place the chicken in a pan that is generously larger than the bird, but not so big that you cannot make a turkey in it. Place the pan in an oven at 425 degrees. Basting it with a first quality butter all the while. Halfway through the cooking, I throw in a pound of small German butterball potatoes, a pound of cipollini onions, those are like the small onions, and a whole head of garlic peeled and separated into cloves. Then a small bundle of fresh thyme and parsley stems, and half-inch cubes of bacon or pancetta. 10 minutes later, add a pound of porcini or other meaty mushrooms. I lower the heat to 375 and let the chicken finish to golden brown juiciness. When the chicken is done, let it rest for 20 minutes and finish cooking the vegetables if they need it. Finally, toss in the parsley leaves. By the way, I call this Bill Blast chicken because Bill, along with John Fairchild from W Magazine, used to order it frequently when I was the chef at the old Le Cirque. In the restaurant, the rotisserie might repeat this process for 20 chickens in a day. Yet he or she must give the same care and attention to a half dozen things at once, from ducks to chickens to squabs to venison. Each has a different cycle of preparations. So on the one hand, the rotisserie must have an intuitive connection to each meat, and on the other, military precision. It takes a very good cook to be a rotisserie. As I mentioned before, all cooks want to work on the line. They think they're going to earn more respect if they're flipping pans. But roasting teaches you an understanding of main ingredients, meat, fowl, fish, that is deeper and that will make you a better chef on the line. A good rotisserie has only the outside of the meat to look at, but he or she must be able to imagine very vividly the transition of juices, the firming of the flesh, and the concentration of flavor that is going on deep inside. And then must be able to think from there to the plate. At the same time, you have to deal with the question of seasoning, an essential element in transforming merely hot meat into a precious moment of savory, succulent gastronomy. Each cut of each animal has its own demands. Often you season before you roast so that as the outer layer of meat caramelizes in the gentle searing of the initial exposure to the heat, it pulls and concentrates flavor to the surface while gently penetrating the flesh. You may also season during the roasting. If this is a whole fowl or fish, then you season the cavity as well so that the seasoning permeates the flesh from the inside. As the completion of the process, the finished roast should be salted again so that as the meat relaxes and the juice renders the flesh, it carries seasoning along with it. Finally, after slicing the meat, you must lightly season again so the first thing your taste buds react to is seasoning, opening up your palate. Resting is nearly as important as roasting. You cannot rush roasting, nor can you be in a rush to serve the roast. Meat must rest after roasting to maintain juiciness, and it is a cardinal rule of cuisine that holding the juices in the meat is the hallmark of properly roasted and served meat. How long? It depends on the meat. A thick cut of beef might rest a half hour or more, allowing the juices to be reabsorbed into the flesh. Although the delicious, juicy churrascaria style is sliced fresh from the fire. Venison, a different story, is not very fatty. It does not have enough space in its fibers to absorb and hold moisture. If you leave it too long, the juices will leave the meat and you'll be left with a bland and its uninteresting taste. So for example, my chestnut crusted loin of venison is served very pink because overcooked venison is horrible, tough, and dry. I rest it for just a few minutes, then slice it so that the juices and blood pearls on top of the slice. Then some sea salt and pepper, and it is perfect. Next, an importance to roasting is braising. Quite literally, braising meat to cook in a brazier. That is, however, red embers. Practically speaking, it involves cooking food that is barely immersed in liquid and slowly drawing out the fat and juices from meat as well as the juices and flavors from herbs and vegetables. It is all about slow cooking and basting, constantly basting. The braising pot is the cook's magic cauldron where flavors swirl, combine, concentrate, and transform. Braising, a rustic form of cooking widely used in every cuisine, is not without art nor the demand of the chef's constant attention. One thing it is not is simply putting some liquid and some meat in a pot, covering it and let it bubble away for a few hours. Braising is not stewing. It is sort of half stewing and half wet roasting. This is why basting is so important. As the flavors in the braising liquid concentrate, you keep basting and you build up a gloss on the meat that is much concentrated and flavorful, right? So you keep on basting it. At the same time, you're reducing liquid. Okay, if you end up with a lot of braising liquid, you have not concentrated the flavors enough. A properly braised piece of meat or fowl or fish has just enough liquid for that serving and no more. Do not shortchange your recipe. Give back to the plate every iota of flavor that the ingredients started with. Right, so I guess I know we want to we always oh, we need more and more and more liquid, and at the end it's not really that. You want that concentrated flavor. To me, braising is the deep soul of French cooking. Any dish that I think of with braising takes me on a culinary tour of France. For example, the lamb shank. I think of Provence, I think of braising the lamb in garlic, herbs, orange zest, olives, tomatoes, and a floral white wine. For the same piece of lamb in Burgundy, I taste the braising liquid of red wine, roasted onions, celery root, lard de campagne, wild mushrooms. Lamb shanks in the southwest is going to be braised with more Spanish and mountain feel. Lots of onions, peppers with some heat, and tomatoes. At the other corner of France, it will be a la station style. Lamb shoulder braised with pork shoulder, rizzling onions and potatoes. Braising reveals the beauty and depth, both historical and cultural, of French cooking. Not only does gastronomic cooking embrace all of these regions, refining their traditions, but also draws on bistro cooking and cuisine. In all, French cuisine, braising is a major element. I know, okay, you want to get to the line, so let's do it. The main activity on the meat and fish lines in sautéing. The textbook definition of sauteing is to cook something in a little bit of fat or oil and high heat, right? So like you're gonna saute vegetables, or you're gonna make I don't know, saute mushrooms or whatever. But it's a simple definition. There's a whole range of variations. First, the tools. I am not a big fan of aluminum. You can never get it really hot and things tend to stick to it, although it's fine for boiling or gentle roasting. Copper, though, can get very hot. When we make a chicken jus in a copper roasting pan, we heat the pan until it is super hot before we put the bones in to roast, which lets us begin with a quick sear and caramelization. Cast iron is also a great heat carrier, like copper. It gets very hot and distributes heat evenly. It is very good for caramelizing bones and meat before you deglaze. So deglaze is like when it gets stuck in the bottom of the pan and you add liquid, right? Like where the fond is a little bits, and then you deglaze and take all the stuff up. The heat upon a word about meat caramelizing. You want it brown, not a light brown. GBD, like the color of my skin. Golden brown and delicious. The surface of well caramelized meat develops sugars and nuttiness and a crust that not only seals in juices, but creates a flavor and texture element that's delicious in its own right. In the modern kitchen, we use induction stoves that employ magnetic resonance. Cast iron works very well with this high-tech method. For pan roasting, I like a black steel pan, well seasoned with salt and oil, rinsed but never washed, just like the Chinese do with their woks. Stainless steel pans are easy to maintain, but in practice things tend to stick on them. I prefer other materials. And that's true, right? We all have our favorite pan and we figure out what works for us, what doesn't. Same thing in a professional kitchen. With vegetables, I like to let the flavor develop slowly and concentrate before I caramelize the outside. Many chefs blanch their vegetables, then throw them into a hot pan with oil and butter. I feel that one preserves pristine flavor more fully when you put the vegetables in a pan, add a little bit of butter, sweet onion, and a stem of rosemary, and slowly heat them, rolling them over and over in the butter, adding a few drops of water as needed. At this medium-low heat, they will be slightly steamed in their own moisture. Sweating is the term we often use for this. With carrots, I start with a little butter or olive oil, chicken stock, fresh, sage, then simmer until they are firm but gently tender. By this time, they have reabsorbed all the juices and released their sugars, which then glaze up beautifully. Covering the pan for the initial wet cooking with a lid or parchment aids this process enormously, allowing evaporation but at a rate that it says 20% as opposed to 100% for an uncovered pan. Right, which makes sense, right? So we can steam it a little bit, we cover it with a pan, so the steam just stays in the pan. Right, if we take it off, the steam just goes, and then why do we steam it for? We also, I don't know what this word is, rosé. It's A-R-R-O-S-E-R. I'll do it a lot too, and that's how I'll remember the word. That is to say, based with butter. For example, a fish fillet is covered in a hot pan. You keep spooning butter over the fish, so that while it cooks and crisps on the bottom, hot butter seeps in and slowly cooks the flesh on top. I think fresh cod responds beautifully to the sensual waves of flavorful heat that butter carries. But almost any firm fleshed fish is well suited for this method. And so much of what we have touched on in this letter, whether it is extracting and reabsorbing juices in roasting, or braising and reducing, or sauteing, then caramelizing, you are working the moisture in the food. You are preparing, you're concentrating, you're reintegrating it back into the ingredients. Heat, concentrate, reintegrate. No matter how you apply heat, this is the transformational aspect of cuisine. How good your food is depends on how well you control this force of nature. That's the end of the chapter. It's true. Like that little section about sauteing, the braising, like those are real big parts of French cooking, and those are techniques that you can't just learn willy-nilly. Like you can't just YouTube and be like, okay, I could do that. It takes years of just practice of knowing how to sear, knowing your pan's hot enough that you can get a good sear and you're not gonna burn, because it's two different things, right? And that's why I like this book a lot. Like, it doesn't tell you everything, but it should push you in the right direction about cooking, about if you want to become a chef, about what's more out there than what you see on the Food Network, you know? So once again, I'm Tattoo. Subscribe if you like what you see. If you feel like I should only read tidbits, if you feel like I should just read straight through, negative, positive, whatever, leave me alone. Leave me alone. Let me know. Once again, we're reading Letters to a Young Chef from Daniel Boulud, and I'll meet you in a couple of days, and we'll go on to the next chapter. Love, peace, and bacon grease.